All right. Green Bay Packers leadership is unified on wanting Aaron Rodgers back next season. Read between the lines there, Will.
Please come back, Aaron. Please.
Wait, let me add to this context, though. Like, is it really their choice or decision? I mean, he set this up it's kind of a mutual decision here, is it not? And their cap situation is so bad that it almost alleviates some problems. So let me just lay this out for you. Because this was floated today, or I should say yesterday, Tuesday, by PFT about getting a 2-year extension.
Football Talk or PFT commentator?
No, Pro Football Talk.
Okay.
I would have included commentator.
I mean, sometimes both are just as reliable.
This is probably my point.
Yeah.
So they floated out the idea of giving him a 2-year deal, $100 million guaranteed, 50 per year. That's what the market is. He's the MVP last 2 years. Okay, great. Yeah, it's cool in theory until then you forget. Oh, remember the first round draft pick that you traded up to take? Oh, so he'd be 4 years into his contract, presumably not playing yet. And you've already had to pick up his 5th-year option that's fully guaranteed. So you just hamstrung yourself into finishing out things with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, it's like a nice idea, but it doesn't make any sense. That doesn't help your cap situation, even though, yeah, there's some creative things you can do to get around it. And you'd assume they'd have to, in that scenario, sign Devontae Adams to an extension. I mean, it was a wild, speculative, like hypothetical that to me doesn't make much sense because of what the position they've already put themselves in with Jordan Love. I think right now they do not want to admit it because the Packers don't want to look like the team that pushed out or traded a guy who was back-to-back MVP in the NFL.
It's never happened that the reigning MVP has left his team. It sure as hell has never happened that the reigning 2-time MVP has left his team. Rodgers also added, I think this is, I'll flip it back on you for a read between the lines. I don't want to be part of a rebuild if I'm going to keep playing, Rodgers said after Saturday night's 13-10 loss to the 49ers.
And here's the truth. If you're the Green Bay Packers, this is the perfect time for a rebuild. Okay. Your cap situation is what, second or third worst, I believe, going into 2022. You've got a young quarterback who you don't know anything about yet. And at some point, he's got to play. So you see if you're going to pick up the 5th-year option, that's now fully guaranteed. And then see if, eventually he's your guy. So not only that, but you can move on from Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith and start over, extend Rashawn Gary, extend Jared Alexander, start to make some of those decisions and build back up. But you have to think about the timing of it too. If you're able to do like a sign-in trade with Devontae Adams, if he wants to go where Aaron Rodgers is at, and you could trade Rodgers and get some draft capital, you'd be set to help build this thing back up in the next 2 years in rather short fashion. And let's look around the NFC North for a second. The Lions have the worst roster in that division. They're not going to be able to all of a sudden take over that division by 2022, 2023. That's going to take a while at best.
Yep.
They're still trying to think if Goff is their answer or if they're going to go draft a quarterback. You've got the Vikings who have to hire a new head coach, a new general manager. Cousins is on his last year. Who knows if he even stays there, depending on what the new head coach, general manager think. And then you've got the Chicago Bears that their roster's in a state of disarray. They just hired, I believe, Ryan Poles as their general manager yesterday, and they're looking for a head coach still. And yes, Justin Fields may be the quarterback of the future, but they're not anywhere close either. You might find yourself, if you make these decisions where you ended up trading Aaron Rodgers to a destination of his choice, Devontae Adams moves on with them, and some of these other pieces you let go, you get in a better cap situation moving forward. You have all this draft capital heading into the next couple of years, and then you start over again, and you see what you have in Jordan Love if he's the guy, because that's why you traded up the draft in the first place. Otherwise, it was the biggest bonehead mistake in the world, and then you got to own up to it, and you got to move on from Jordan Love now, and then extend Rodgers and try to make him happy for the next 2 years. That's the only two directions this can go.
And the thing about the Jordan Love thing, let's say you trade him and you roll with Rodgers, you can't, I mean, the explanation that they would have to go with, which is like, yeah, we drafted him, but, we're just going to take it as a silver lining that Aaron Rodgers was great for 4 years. It's like, no, you could have had T. Higgins or Michael Pittman, right, and maybe that's enough to push you over the top to win a Super Bowl.
Well, I know there's a list of a bunch of wide receivers. They could have Brian Edwards. They could have all these wide receivers.
Higgins and Pittman went like 5 or 6 picks afterwards. I mean,
right? No. But they did a list of every single pick I think they've taken the last year or two, and there was like the guy who was taken after them. You can lay out a list of wide receivers they could have instead of you know, guys who are going to be like Alan Lazard's unrestricted free agent, Valdez Scanlon's restricted free agent, Randall Cobb's probably going to be a cap casualty. I can't imagine.
Devontae Adams, free agent.
Adams, free agent. I mean, so there's all these question marks around that position, and you never addressed it. So that's a whole other conversation. But I think to your point, it does put Brian Gutekunst in that hot seat position where it's like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you traded up assets to get this guy. You never played him at all, really, and then you trade him off, all to invest more money into Aaron Rodgers. And yeah, it makes sense because you're like, oh, well, we didn't think he was going to be the MVP in back-to-back years. It's my bad, but yeah,
that means that was bad. Yes, that was pure bad.
Then that makes it look even worse that he didn't draft a wide receiver.
Right. You incorrectly identified the state of play of your franchise quarterback, who was a surefire Hall of Famer,
right,
and probably the greatest player in franchise history,
right.
And
the only guy you've got the last 2 years, while he's been MVP, has been Amari Rodgers in the draft. That's it.
Right. And the other thing about this is, if you look at the way, because I was asked this about this quote, and I was like, I guess, and I started looking, I was like, oh my God, they're $40 million over the salary cap. That's a problem. And
that's without signing Adams, by the way.
Correct. And Devontae Adams is not going to sign a contract until he knows what Aaron Rodgers is doing. They will probably franchise tag him, but that's virtually impossible until you get $15-18 million under the salary cap. The quickest way to get under the salary cap, the three most obvious candidates to cut are Zadarius Smith, Preston Smith, and Randall Cobb.
Right.
Two guys are two of your probably your two best pass rushers. Although I guess Rashawn Gary could make a case. Yeah. And then the other guy is Aaron Rodgers' best friend.
You brought him before Aaron Rodgers.
And you also have to give Rashawn Gary and Jair Alexander extensions. Now, granted, you can give them small numbers and balloon later down the road. That's not how the Packers usually operate. They're not going to want to try and just finagle the cap upside down to make Aaron Rodgers happy. So it boils down to, you're screwed. Is what it boils down to.
No, it boils down to, all right, pick. Is he staying or is he going to be somewhere else in 2022?
Yeah. But if he stays,
I'll put it this way. I don't think he's staying.
So I want to ask you this. Before the 49ers game, I was 90+% sure that he was staying. Now I'm like 60 or 50.
I've said this throughout the entire season. And there was an NBC Sunday Night Football game where if you'll recall, Al Michaels and Chris Collins were like, he seems happy. Everything's great.
He's patched things up.
He's coming back. He's eating cheese curds now. Forget that dairy-free diet. Like, he's buying in. He just crushed a Pabst Blue Ribbon. I don't know. Did you see that? That all to me was, well, yeah, you're winning in the NFL. I've seen some really dysfunctional relationships in locker rooms that like worked because we were winning, right? Like, it's like the honeymoon phase in a relationship. You're like, oh yeah, there's a couple of those like unredeeming qualities and flaws, but I mean, I don't know, like it's just hot and heavy and we love each other so blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden when things aren't going as well, you're like, wait a second. Who's going to change that crappy diaper again? I feel like I've done the last 20. Like,
I know. Let's have another kid. That'll fix everything.
Yeah, like let's add on. So that was one of the deals where it's like everything was going great. I'm like, yeah, I'm not thinking this is the time where all this is going to come out. It's going to come out when they lose.
Yeah, if
they lose, and they did. So now it becomes the point of all of what had happened in the past and all those tough decisions they have to make. They're smacking them right in the face. And the reality is, much like the reality was last offseason, he was excited to go to San Francisco. I think he wanted to go he thought it was a realistic possibility. And it didn't happen, which, by the way, all these 49ers fans are like, oh, he's 0-4 against us in the playoffs. It's like, hey, dude, you'd love to have him right now.
You would have won. You would be winning the next 3 Super Bowls if you had Rodgers.
Yeah, you would have loved to have Aaron Rodgers. So you should be clamoring and hoping that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan find a way of bringing him in, even with Trey Lance being there and Garoppolo with a year left. But yeah, I digress. I do think there's that thought in his mind now where he's looking at, like, where else would I want to go play? And I keep going back to Denver, especially if they end up hiring Nathaniel Hackett, who finished his second interview yesterday. If he's the head coach, you'd have to think they're a shoo-in for one of the biggest pitches to Aaron Rodgers and bring him in there.
Because it's hey, do you remember when Peyton Manning came to Denver and just did what he wanted on offense? Guess who we've got? And guess what you can do? And here's Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton and Noah Fant and a decent offensive line. They'll go to work, and we'll hire somebody to run the defense, and maybe they'll be good. And then it's, by the way,
you know what? They might even trade some of those assets to Green Bay, some of those wide receivers, because they need wide receivers, in exchange for Devontae Adams.
That's not a terrible idea.
No. I mean, if they traded Cortland Sutton and,
Jerry Jeudy and 2 firsts for Rodgers and Devontae, maybe 3 first.
Well, they got some seconds too you could throw in there. But you get what I'm saying. I mean, that's a possible scenario. You could trade some assets to some pieces. I mean, you only need a little bit of running game, Devontae Adams, and one other piece. I mean, that seems to be able to be what Green Bay does. But one last thing on Rodgers. He's claiming that people root against him because of his vaccination status. Are you buying this? Are you read between the lines here?
I would guess that there are definitely people who root against him, who are not pro Aaron Rodgers because of his outspoken status and immunization beliefs. And I mean, Joe Rogan stuff.
I do. Well, I think by and large, like, we're a country that's basically, you pick a side, all right? Yeah. I'm on this side, you're on that side, all right? We can't agree on anything else, okay? It's chocolate ice cream good. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Do you like it? Okay, I don't like it then.
It's your vanilla, mother. Yeah.
It's just, what is it, Neapolitan, where you've got the 3 different flavors?
I like all 3.
You can't have Neapolitan in this, all right?
You flavored cuck. What are you doing? Get out of here.
So, the reality is, it's true. I know people don't want to admit it, but it is true. I think there's also probably a group that would say, well, you lied to us, and that's really what it's about. It's like,
Now there's also a group that's like, you know who I love? Aaron Rodgers, baby. Like, you're a Bears fan. I don't care.
I don't care. He didn't get that back. And then there's those who are like, we're going to jab him when we see him. We're going to make sure he gets that back.
I would also point out in the 49ers thing, like, if the 49ers could have traded 2 first-round picks for Rodgers last offseason, I guess they would have to give up their first-round pick last year. So maybe this is
well, that was the idea behind is when they traded up to the number 3 overall, they were thinking that along with another package of picks was going to be enough
to get Rodgers.
And
when it didn't happen, the
49ers backed out.
So you think that was in place, and then what do you think the 49ers backed out?
Oh, excuse me, the Packers backed out.
Yeah, the Packers backed out, and so it was probably a leak from the 49ers about Rodgers wanting to be traded on draft day to try and push it a little bit.
Yeah, that would probably make a little more sense. Or maybe even if Rodgers wanted it so much.
Or Rodgers found out the Packers backed out and was pissed and was like, hey, leak this out now.
I think that's the more likely scenario.
In hindsight, the Packers should have done it.
Yeah. You just put it off for another year. And look, they were the number 1 seed in the NFC. I don't know that I'm actually going to subscribe to that. I do think they had a shot at winning a Super Bowl as good as anyone.
In hindsight, with the law of the playoff law.
Well, yeah, hindsight's always 2020 though. Like, the reality is, like, I think they played the best they could. It's now time to cut ties. Like, where I think, like I said before, it's the perfect time to rebuild if you want to rebuild, given all the complications.